I have yet to meet one vegan entrepreneur that didn't have more than a money mission, that had like this more altruistic mission. And that includes, Ethan Brown, Patrick Brown, all those guys. I believe they're mission oriented too. And the mission is important because it really keeps you going when the going gets tough and gets you to your Tofurky moment.
Welcome to the Business for Good podcast, a show where we spotlight companies making money by making the world a better place. I'm your host, Paul Shapiro, and if you share a passion for using commerce to solve many of the world's most pressing problems, then this is the show for you. Hello, friends, and welcome to the 39th episode of Business for Good. I've been heartened by many of the listeners contacting me asking about what is going on with little Eddie, the foster pit bull who my wife Tony and I have taken in from our local animal shelter in Sacramento, California after it was shut down. And many people have asked, is Eddie going to become a foster fail, or maybe it should be called a foster success, but will he be converted from our foster dog simply to our dog? Well, my friends, I'm happy to report there is a silver lining to this pandemic, for our family at least, which is that little Eddie has indeed become our dog. And amazingly, The Guardian even did a feature on him, making him the poster dog for pandemic pups who are being either adopted or at least fostered during the pandemic for people to have companions during shelter in place, and who are trying to help out with the animal shelters that are being shut down during this time. So, if you want to check out the little photos of Eddie, or if you want to see his story, we'll include the Guardian article about him in the show notes of this episode. Now, speaking of this episode, I want you to imagine just how much work it takes to write a book. And then imagine all the work that it takes to prepare for that book's launch and how important media attention on your book is when it launches. And then imagine that just a few weeks before your big launch, a global pandemic hits, shutting down society and dominating all news coverage from morning till night. Sadly, that is the fate of Seth Tibbott, the OG of the plant-based meat space, the founder of Tofurky, the man who helped blaze the trail that led to the explosion in popularity that plant-based meat is enjoying today. When Seth started out, as he notes, his big expertise was really losing money year after year selling tempeh. But through that long winter of losses, Seth ended up building a household name brand that today is said to be worth $100 million. Seth has written a fascinating autobiography that chronicles his unusual life and his unlikely success as a hippie-turned-entrepreneur 40 years ago. It's called In Search of the Wild Tofurky: How a Business Misfit Pioneered Plant-Based Foods Before They Were Cool. And as luck would have it, his book comes out in April 2020, right in the height of the COVID-19 pandemic. That's all anyone wants to talk about, and understandably so, of course. Well, if you're listening to this show, you likely don't need to be reminded that this particular pandemic is born out of humanity's exploitation of animals, and that other potentially deadlier pandemics are likely to be born out of our risky animal use practices on concentrated animal feeding operations. In fact, I recently wrote a piece for Scientific American about this very topic that we'll also include in the show notes, regarding why raising fewer animals for food will reduce the risk of the next pandemic. Seth's life and his career have been devoted to helping lighten humanity's footprint on the planet, including shifting toward plant-based proteins for myriad reasons, including pandemic prevention. So take a moment while sheltering in place and listen to Seth's inspirational story of repeated business failure followed by enormous success. As someone who released my own book, Clean Meat, a couple years ago, I know how important momentum at a book launch is. So if you like what you hear, think about ordering a copy of Seth's new book, again, In Search of the Wild Tofurky. It's written with entrepreneurs who want to make a difference in the world as a key target audience. So perhaps that's you. I know I got a lot out of reading it, and I suspect you will too. I now bring you a special pandemic edition of Business for Good with Seth Tibbott. Seth Tibbott, welcome to the Business for Good podcast.
Great to be here. Thanks for having me, Paul.
Hey, it is a real pleasure and honor for us to be talking here. Do you happen to remember, Seth, the very, very first time that we met, which was quite a random meeting? Do you remember this back in DC?
I may need a refresher course in that. Why don't you give me a hint there?
You were coming up out of the metro on the Red Line. and Josh Balk and I were passing out brochures about plant-based eating, and we were showing videos about it, just like missionaries on the street. Now, do you remember it?
Oh, yeah. I got that. I came up out of the escalator, and there right in front of me was Josh handing me a flyer. And then he had this old beat up van that he had, that I guess you guys had retrofitted with a TV on the side. And there was this big video happening of kind of factory farm scenes and different things. It was very impressive. That was like, oh my God, my people.
I don't remember the year, but it was probably around 2001 would be my recollection of when we were really doing that back in those days. And for full credit, actually, the person who retrofitted that van is named Eddie Lama, who starred in that movie, The Witness, back then. But he donated that to us, and we ended up using it twice a week, like in DuPont Circle and in other popular DC neighborhoods. So, but you were so kind because, you were a big name already in the plant-based world back then. And you asked us if we had heard of Tofurky. And of course, we said we were customers. And you said, I'll be back. And remember, you brought a whole bunch, like a cooler full of Tofurky that you generously gave to us. And do you remember? Yeah, it was so nice of you. And it was kind of like, sometimes if you give a dog a treat, that dog like always loves you and always has a positive affinity for you. We were the dogs,
Yeah. Well, I had a big affinity for everything that you were doing back then. And I had been to the Expo East trade show there, and we were peddling our wares there, and we had some left over. So it was very fortuitous that we could find a good home for the Tofurky. And I'm glad that it made it to a good home, just like you are with a dog. You always want to find a good home for your puppies or children or your products. So great meeting.
I can assure you it went to a very appreciative home in both of our stomachs. And as somebody who has just converted a foster dog to my own dog with my wife, Tony, I can assure you that the analogy rings true. So anyway, I know, though, that in the annals of the Tofurky history, Seth, that chance meeting outside of a metro station in D.C., of course, is a very minor one. But I just read your book, In Search of the Wild Tofurky. I really thought it was a riveting tale. In fact, it reminded me a little bit of the tale of another entrepreneur from Oregon who started his own successful company, Phil Knight's book, Shoe Dog, about the founding of Nike. Have you read that?
Haven't read it, but he started with a waffle iron in his garage, didn't he?
Yeah, well, his co-founder started with the waffle iron in his garage.
Oh, yeah.
Co-founder was a famous track coach at the time, and that is how they got started. But Shoe Dog really gives the story about how Nike went from this idea to near death time and time again to now a global corporate behemoth, which reminds me a little bit of the story, maybe not global corporate behemoth, but certainly a big name in the plant-based space and one of the OGs of plant protein, as the book subtitle says, before it was cool. You mentioned in the book, Seth, that one of the inspirations for you to even start thinking about plant-based eating was reading Francis Moore Lape's Diet for a Small Planet. So tell me about that and what impact that book had on you and why.
Yeah, so the year was 1971, I believe, when I first read Diet for a Small Planet by Francis Moore Lape, and I was a student in Ohio at Wittenberg University near Antioch, and I was learning the ropes of elementary education then, but I was more interested in kind of minoring in outdoor education and natural history. And it made such complete sense to me that, Ohio especially used to be all trees. They used to say a squirrel could jump from Pennsylvania all the way to Indiana without touching ground. And by the time I got there in the 1970s, it was probably 85% farmland. And so the wildlife habitat was being encroached on. And after reading the book by Francis Moore Lape, she was the first one to point out, the inefficiency of feeding grain, through animals, and you put 16 pounds of grain or whatever into making, a very small, like 1 pound or less of protein. And that struck home with me because I was like, oh, if there was a more efficient way of getting protein to the people, if we were eating low on the food chain, there'd be more natural wildlife space for all these birds and animals that I love so much. So that was really what started out this whole journey for me, was that and a meal of lentils, rice, and onions from my friend Laurel McGowan, who was this quiet art student. And, it really drove home to me that, hey, this is delicious. I could live this way. And a couple of years later, another groundbreaking book for me was Stephen Gaskin's book about the farm, which was an intentional community or commune in Tennessee, where they had 1,200 hippies living on 1,600 acres of farmland that they had bought. And they were growing all these soybeans, but they didn't know what to do with them. So this guy, one of the farm members, who was a PhD microbiologist, Alexander Lyon, he got sent to the NIH laboratories and libraries in Bethesda, Maryland, and he found all these soy foods, but particularly he found this one that was called tempeh, which was an Indonesian fermented food. And it was, very interesting to him as a microbiologist. So he wrote to Dr. Clifford Hesseltine in Cornell and Dr. Wang in the Northern Regional Research Lab in Peoria, Illinois. And he got some of this magic tempeh starter, brought it back to the farm, and it just went crazy. It went viral. Like people couldn't have enough of it. Now, mind you, the farm was not a vegetarian community. It was what they called themselves a pure vegetarian community, which today we would say is a vegan community. But back then, they billed themselves as a pure vegetarian. And they said a pure vegetarian doesn't eat eggs, cheese, or milk, or honey or dairy. It's all beans and grains and fruits and veggies.
Yeah, it's interesting, Seth, that you talk about these two books that had that had such a big influence on you, because normally when I think about books that have really had a transformative effect on readers, almost always it seems to be stories, right? It seems to be novels, whether it's, Animal Farm, Brave New World, 1984, Fahrenheit 451, like so many times, even on the right, if you look at books like, books that are considered like canonical for the right, like Atlas Shrugged and Fountainhead and so on.
Right.
It seems like we are a storytelling species. And one reason why people like books like yours is because it is a lot of stories about how you did this. And it's interesting to me that there are sometimes breakout nonfiction books that really have a transformative effect, whether it's Silent Spring or Diet for a Small Planet, or this book about the farm. Like sometimes, or Animal Liberation, sometimes there are books that are not necessarily storytelling, but they really have a transformative effect. Have you thought about that, like this difference between fiction and nonfiction and what impact they have?
Yeah, I have. And by the way, this year, Diet for a Small Planet, it's either this year or next year, they're putting out their 50th anniversary edition. And so it's an update version. I'm looking forward to reading that. But there's definitely, I hear what you're saying. And one of the amazing things, I'm jumping ahead here, but about Tofurky to me was that when Tofurky came out, it got placement on both fictional and non-fictional TV spots. Like, for instance, we were on the Food Network quite a bit, and they were going in or how it's made, and they'd come in with their cameras and they'd show people how it's made. And Ted Koppel and Nightline and all these other places would have, serious discussions about vegetarian, vegan food. And this is like in the 1990s and early 2000s. But it also crossed over into the fictional realm. And you had like characters in movies, 27 Dresses, The X-Files. There was an answer on Jeopardy. You know, there's all these.
Seth, to be clear, Tofurky was not an answer on Jeopardy. Who is Seth Tibbott was an answer on Jeopardy.
Yeah, as if that would help them. They didn't get it. And it was the $400 question. And my friends were quick to point out that you're nothing until you're the Daily Double. So really.
Yeah, good point. Good point. Good thing you still have a few decades left so you can aspire to something then. Yeah, I mean, I definitely want to get to talking about that, but about how Tofurky became part of the really like the cultural zeitgeist. I mean, in many ways, for a long time, it was really used almost in the same way that Kleenex or Xerox was used. That yes, it's a brand, but people used it also to talk about an entire category of foods for sure. But before we get there, I just want to talk about, the humble beginnings, because people now, you go to Walmart and you see Tofurky in there, but, let's just talk like at the time. I mean, you write in the book, like people called you Upside Down Man, right? Like who was Upside Down Man and why was he so unlikely to start a business that would be doing anything in the world?
Yeah, well, I've never really met anybody that was least likely to start a business or, less trained than I was in business at Cume. So there was nobody that was less trained in the business ways of business than I was. I had, after college, I graduated, as a naturalist, and I had an 8-year career as a teacher naturalist, all in Oregon, or in the Portland area. And so that was my trade. And in 1980, I got a job teaching kids, high school kids up in Alaska, about the outdoors. So I worked up there for a summer. Thank you, Jimmy Carter, for having the CETA program that helped launch that and the Youth Conservation Corps. And I saved up $7,500, which was the most money that I'd ever saved up. And after I came back in October, I noticed that all of the outdoor school programs were starting to dry up. And, there was this Republican wave that was coming on, and Ronald Reagan came into power. And then anything with the letters ENV in front of it, environmental, was like, we don't need that. We don't need that. So a lot of the programs that I had been counting on to eke out my meager living as a outdoor school teacher were suddenly gone. And I was at a point where I needed to make a change. And at that point, I had been to the farm, I had found tempeh, and I was making tempeh in small little batches. I had a old refrigerator strung with Christmas tree lights in a barn that I was making about 5 pounds of tempeh for people that would come out to a retreat center where I was living. I was living in a teepee at that time. And that was really where the business started. But before that, as soon as I came back from Alaska, I moved into a house with my girlfriend, and we were in this about 25 miles outside of Portland, Oregon, in a small town. And this small town had a gas station, a fire hall, and a Indonesian restaurant. And I was like, oh my God, these guys probably have tempeh. And I went in there and I met the owner, Ina, and she was looking for tempeh. And I told her, hey, I'm your neighbor and I know how to make tempeh. And she was just like, what? I've never heard of anybody in this country making tempeh. I can get tahu, which is the Indonesian way that they pronounce tofu, but I can't get tempeh. And so I said, I'll make you some. And she said, oh, yeah, but it's got to be good. I can't trust you, to make good tempeh because I've never seen anybody make tempeh over here. So I went home and Kim and I whipped up a batch of tempeh. We came down the next morning. It was beautiful. Like when tempeh is fresh, it smells of mushroom, and it's this beautiful smell. And it has this white mold that grows on it. And a lot of people are going, mold, ooh, but it's, in the fermented food craze now, people have learned to accept more fermented food. So there's nothing like fresh tempeh, I'll tell you. Like we make great tempeh, Light Life makes great tempeh, but nobody makes as good a tempeh as you can make in your home. So we got this fresh tempeh and we laid it on Ina, and she was like, oh my God, this is so good. Can you make 10 pounds more? And I was like, oh yeah, 10 pounds. That's a big order for me. But because I was making it in the refrigerator with the Christmas tree lights and little picnic coolers with heat source.
That's really fascinating. Well, as somebody who is part of the tiny little minority of a sliver of 1% who regularly eats tempeh, I can assure you, I think it's great. And interestingly enough, on a per ounce basis, it is my understanding the highest protein of any whole vegan food. So not any, plant-based meats that are made with like isolates or fractionated, of a whole food that is vegan. Tempeh has the highest per ounce amount of protein, which is pretty.
Not only that, but it's like there's this scale of how easily the body assimilates protein, and tempeh is right up there near or at the top. I mean, it's really like when you eat tempeh, as I did tonight for dinner with a nice curry that my wife Sue made, man, you just feel so good and powerful. And, that's a unique trait, is just how that you can really feel the protein surging through your body and in ways that no other meat alternative, even like Tofurky or the Beyond Burgers, Impossible Burgers, you just don't get the same je ne sais quoi out of protein. So I'm still a big fan of tempeh, and still make it at home from time to time too.
Huh, how fascinating. Well, so before we leave the tempeh topic, I know we're really beating this tempeh horse after it has perished, but I do just have to bring up one piece of trivia that you mentioned in the book. So, for anybody who has seen Wild Country on Netflix, the story. The story of the Rajneeshis who were living in Oregon in this town of Rajneeshpuram. And these people, for those of you who haven't seen it, I highly recommend it. But it's basically about a cult that engages in some pretty nefarious behavior. But one thing that they did, which was actually pretty good, it turns out, was that they were a major customer of Seth Tibbott's in the very early days, in the 1980s. And Seth, what's the piece of trivia that you give about them and tempeh? Because it's a really interesting historical fact.
Well, they first came over. They tracked me down when I was in I had rented an elementary school building in a small little town of about 17 houses, called Hewsum, Washington. And the school had been sitting empty for 7 years. And after about a year making 100 pounds of tempeh a night in my local co-op kitchen, I moved the business up there, and I was making now like 250, 300 pounds of tempeh a day. And I was working in the days. And back then, this is before cell phones. This is before answering machines. I mean, you had a phone, but if you weren't there to answer it, you couldn't get a hold of anybody. So the Rajneeshis were all red clad, and they stuck out like sore thumbs. Anywhere they went, they were all dressed in red. So two of these Rajneeshis came looking for me because they had a Guru festival coming up in July, and this was like about this time of year, and they said, we want to serve your 5-grain tempeh to the people that are coming from all over the world to Rajneeshpuram. Like, this is really the early days of Rajneeshpuram, and it was really kind of a lot of the problems that they incurred hadn't started to manifest yet. And so they said, we're going to have like 10,000 people there. So we need like 2,000 pounds of tempeh, which, today would be nothing to make. We could do like 8 or 10,000 pounds in a day. But back then, that was like almost, 2 or 3 weeks worth of work. But I said, sure. And we made the tempeh and we put it in my Toyota pickup truck that I had converted into a cooler and drove it over into the hot sun to the desert. And they had this big cook tent there that they had built for the festival. I don't know, where they got the money, but I think Sheila was one of the she was the spokesperson for them. And I think she had quite a bit of money invested she had come into in her family. And so they would just build buildings. It was like a movie set. Every time you went there, it was something different. Like, the kitchen had 12 refrigerator trucks, big semis backed up to it to feed all these people. And they had a big row of about 20 woks. And they made this unbelievable stir fry, which I think is probably the biggest tempeh meal, even to this day, that has ever been served in the U.S. I'd imagine Indonesia might have had some bigger ones, but I don't know.
No, it's got to be. It's got to be the single largest tempeh feast in American history. I mean, when are you going to have 10,000 people all eating an entree of tempeh? It's unbelievable. I mean, again, when I watched this docuseries on Netflix called Wild Wild Country, my jaw was just on the ground by how insane things got with this cult.
Oh, I know it. I know it.
You allude to some of their problems, but it's actually one of the only times where there's actually been an actual case of like bioterrorism in the United States.
Oh, I know. Those guys they'd still be in jail if they did that today.
So, speaking of things that are running to this day, you started this company. You didn't have any. You didn't have any venture capitalists who were pumping money in. You didn't necessarily have any money of your own, but you did have some assistance from your brother, and you said your mother gave you an advance against your inheritance as well. But the idea was basically to create products for fellow vegetarians. Things that would appeal to folks who already had decided to stop eating meat, and instead you thought maybe they would try tempeh products or maybe temperoni on their pizza.
Right.
But at some point, you decided that there was going to be a pivot. And that pivot was going to be not just making these alternatives, but products that actually started tasting more and more like meat that you would be selling. And that's really how Tofurky came to be. So after years of selling tempeh and continuing to lose money every year, as you note in the book, Tofurky ends up getting born as a brand. So how did that happen?
Yeah, well, I mean, I was actually in the early 90s. I had been at things for a while. The first 9 years I had made $31,000 total take-home pay, which wasn't much. But then,
and to be clear, you're saying your total take-home pay for yourself over 9 years, not per year. Over 9 years was 31,000.
Yeah, thank you for clarifying that. Yeah, and so I felt like a failure as a business person, and I was like, this isn't working out. And at that point I had on my $300 a month salary, that's what that comes out to, I had built a 3-story tree house that I lived in, and I had written some articles about tree houses, and I had gotten a lot of response from all these people that who lived in trees or knew. They were like, oh, my neighbor has a tree house. You ought to come check it out. So I was, in my spare time, driving around the country and photographing tree houses because I wanted to do a treehouse book. And everybody thought, oh, that's a great idea. I don't know why there isn't one. And eventually that I got beat to the punch because Peter Nelson, who you can see on Treehouse Masters show that's on Home and Garden Network now, he did a great job with it, and he beat me to the punch. Did a treehouse book, does treehouse calendars, builds tree houses for some rich people. But after that dream fell apart, I was like, oh my God, that was my way out. Now what? I'm going to have to reinvest and make this tempeh or food business go. And in 1992, I had I married Sue in 1991, and 92, Luke came along. So now I had a family, and, I had 300 a month, wasn't really going to cut it. And so I had always struggled with Thanksgiving personally as a vegetarian. And what I had noticed was that at that point in time, I was going down to the little store in the town that I lived in every Sunday, and I'd carry Luke on my back, and we'd get the Sunday paper and we'd bring it home, and I'd look through the want ads for used tempeh equipment or some pots and pans. And I'd also read the Sunday funnies. And what I noticed was that at Thanksgiving, the Sunday before Thanksgiving, there was always 2 or 3 kind of ha-ha comics about, hey, vegetarians, you got a vegetarian coming over? Are you going to serve them white tofu or dark tofu? And hey, blah, blah, blah. It was all making a joke at it. And I said, boy, that's a funny joke, but it's kind of a good idea too. And about that time, I was delivering tempeh to a customer in Portland, Hans Robel of the Higher Taste, which is a brilliant sandwich shop to this day. And they make sandwiches all over Portland. And he was making this stuffed tofu roast that he was selling about 25 of just to his prime top customers in Portland. And he was getting $50 for a 5-pound tofu roast and a tub of gravy. And I was like, oh man, Hans, this is genius. let's do something together.
So, Seth, one of the stories in the book that I thought was so funny was about why it is that Tofurky does not have an E. Because you see so often people misspelling it, even people who know the company misspell it, putting an E in there the way that turkey is spelled, but there's no E. Why? Why is there no E?
Yeah, boy, if I had a nickel for every Tofurkey, that story goes. But back in 1981, when I was delivering tempeh to the stores in Portland, I would often buy a Tofurky sandwich, and that was spelled with a EY. And it was delicious. And it was a local company that was doing it. And I always remembered the name. The product was only on the market for a year or two. And so when I met Hans and we had created this 5-pound stuffed tofu roast, and I had made these tempeh drumettes, and there was gravy, we were like, what do you want to call it? And, people were, the more sane people were like, let's call it holiday tofu roast or something serious like that. But I had been trying to play it serious businessman for 15 years, and where had it gotten me? Nowhere. And so I was like, let's lighten up. Let's try the name Tofurky. But back then, only 30% of Americans had computers in their home. So that was a problem. So how did they get a hold of a company and give them feedback or ask questions? There was 2 ways. One, you wrote a letter or a postcard. And then 2 was you called them on the 800 number, because back then, millennials, you had to spend a fortune to call long distance. It was like something crazy, like 50, 60 cents a minute. And so the 800 number was very important. So what I wanted was 1-800-Tofurky, but when I spelled it out, it didn't match up to the letters because there was 8 letters in Tofurkey and 7 letters in Tofurky. So I said, I'm going to get 800 Tofurky. So I signed up for it, and it was actually, I got 888 Tofurky. And that fall, I put it on the box, I put it in ads, I put it on brochures. And then I was sitting in the office reflecting on the successful Tofurky season. And I was like, I wonder why we didn't get more calls on that 1-888 Tofurky number. And then I was like, I wonder what happens if you spell Tofurky, Tofurke, and dial that. So I dialed it up, and this woman answers the phone, and she has a hair salon in LA, and she read me the riot act for about 5 minutes because she had just been getting inundated with calls. She was like, "You're the one that makes that damn tofu turkey. I swear to God, if I ever meet you." And offered to send her one, but she wouldn't be appeased. So I just sat there and let her rant on me for a good 5 minutes. And that was one of the downsides to it. I trademarked it, and I trademarked Tofurkey too, because we have both URLs, because people still write, info at tofurkey.com, but it still gets there. So live and learn. Maybe it was a mistake. I don't know.
Well, it's really interesting. So I actually just looked up who owns Tofurky.com with an E in there, and I noticed, indeed, it is none other than Seth Tibbott of Hood River, Oregon. So good job on that. Now, okay, the idea was a tempeh company, but people weren't buying enough tempeh to actually make it a profitable business. So instead, you start making the Tofurky, and it starts out as a, really more like a seasonal holiday option. But you keep on iterating, and eventually you come up with this range of products. So help us fast forward through that time, from really spectacular growth of the company, whereas you had been certainly growing each year, but not in any type of an exponential way. What was it about plant-based meat, do you think, that made it so much more popular? Certainly it wasn't only the name, but it was also something about that product. So why do you think it was that plant-based meat was so much more popular than tempeh?
Yeah, well, that's a great question, but I think one of the drawbacks to tempeh is that it takes a little knowledge about how to cook it. When tempeh is cooked right, it's unbelievable, but because tofu was first to come on the market here, people tended to cook tempeh or not cook tempeh even like tofu. Like tofu's, I like tofu raw. I mean, it doesn't have to be flavored, but tempeh raw, not so much. And you could.
I got to interrupt you, man. I'll tell you, if you take, it's a little bit of a misnomer to call either one of them raw, since there's obviously a lot of cooking that goes into making them. But I know what you mean, where you don't do anything after
Right.
after you buy it. But I will take tempeh, slice it up, and use it to dip into hummus. Now, admittedly, I'm not known for having finer tastes. Admittedly, I believe it would taste better if you toasted it first. But as a good snack, you can just cut it into these wedges and dip it into hummus, and I actually think it's quite good that way.
Okay, there you go. But in Indonesia, that in your stomach of stomach, Paul, you would, if I cooked tempeh for you in a little pan and sautéed it, you'd go, wow.
Oh, I'm not saying it's not better cooked. I'm just saying,
No. Yeah.
there is a minuscule portion of us out there who do find it still
Right.
a good food to eat, even without cooking it.
Yeah, good point. But the point is that there's very little ready to eat tempeh, whereas tofurky, and especially when we came out with the deli slices, which came out in 1997 after 3 years of being in the holiday business. And which was great because November and December were traditionally slow periods for selling tempeh. And then the Tofurky came along and, here's the fast, time of the year for us. And we would get all these calls from ABC, Wall Street Journal. I put the Wall Street Journal on hold to talk to the Washington Post at one point, and it was all of this attention. And then January 1 would roll around and the phones would stop ringing and we'd slink back into our same old used to be. And so we wanted to expand into something. And, we looked at the turkey industry and they said, look at all this turkey year-round deli slices and sausage and everything. So just having something that's ready to eat and flavored, in the Tofurky deli slices, you just rip open the package, and a bigger demographic than you, Paul Shapiro, just really, it's so simple. And, it's been a staple for many a vegan traveling across the country. But, it was like a moment right there. I think Tofurky galvanized, because there were other deli slices or other meat alternatives, but, Tofurky stood out. And, because it had this bully pulpit of every fall, getting all this media attention and everything, the brand just was able to grow into consciousness once again. And, some from fictional characters eating it and some from non-fictional point of view. So it just went deeper into the American culture than any meat alternative had ever gone before. It boldly went where no meat alternative had gone before.
Indeed, that is certainly true. So as the company was growing, one of the things that you note in the book, Seth, about the success, that the ways that you were able to make it eventually successful, were that you repeatedly fired yourself. And that's, of course, to somebody who doesn't know what you mean by that, quite shocking. How does the founder and CEO repeatedly fire himself from his company? So what do you mean by that? Why is it important for founders of companies to repeatedly fire themselves?
Well, when you start out bootstrapping anyways, you don't have money to hire specialists like R&D chefs, like maintenance people, like production people, and CFO, whatever, salesman, marketer. So what I learned was that one of the big moments for us was as I would shed jobs and I would hire somebody that the job usually improved, somebody that I'd hire that was a specialist in sales or a specialist in marketing. And it wasn't that necessarily I was doing a bad job at those, but I was doing too many jobs. And so I think having the ability to know what you're weak in and what you're strong in is a valuable tool for the bootstrapper and the entrepreneur. So, knowing when to fire yourself and hand it over to a professional, like, when I hired the first sales guy, that I was like, oh my God, the growth just went crazy because this guy would get up in the morning and he'd live and breathe sales. And I was living and breathing 100 different things. So, just even yesterday, I was talking to this guy and he said, you're probably a foodie and a really good chef to create all these Tofurky products. And I was like, no, I'm not. I just knew that, there was people better than me that could do a better job of that. So I fired myself from the research and development job and hired a professional. So knowing when to do that is a key.
I have often said that one of the keys to success is to hire people who know a lot more than you do about a whole variety of things, or at least just surround yourself with them in the form of advisors or in some other way, because the amount that you don't know is always going to be so much bigger than the amount that you do know. And the idea of like, just trying to go on your own and do everything, it may seem romantic, but in reality, it is a great recipe for success. And so, speaking of not going it on your own, in the book, you make a great point about the fact that Tofurky is still family owned, that you have never taken venture capital money, and that you don't have these outside investors. Of course, your brother Bob, you note throughout the book, was the continual savior for the company, who for years of unprofitability continued loaning the company money time and time again, or investing in the company as well. And so I want to ask you about that for somebody who might want to start their own company today and they want to make a big impact, but if they don't happen to have some sibling or relative who is going to be in a position to continually loan them money, what would you recommend to them? Would you tell them that they shouldn't take venture capital? Would you tell them that they should just go for bank loans? Like, what would you recommend to somebody who is starting their own company and had no source of family wealth to help them?
Yeah, well, I did borrow money for the startup years. Bob was critical in that, but we always paid him back, and then we started borrowing from banks soon, and we became the darlings of the bank industry. But that's a great point. I'm not opposed to venture capital, and the space has really changed right now. When you have the big titans of industry right now with Impossible and Beyond, and those guys, and even Light Life being part of Maple Leaf now, like it's a challenging time for sure. But there still is a debt financing way of going about it, and I was just pretty stupid in the money uh, running business ways. I think you can still get startup money and loans. There's SBA loans. There's all kinds of different products that are out there, and there's people out there with money looking for homes, certainly for it. So I'm much more open now to the idea of venture capital. I mean, we were lucky to grow out of the largest of my brother, but also through a lot of just bank loans and leasing equipment and all kinds of different ways. But back in the day when Tofurky was really getting hot, what I noticed was that the the venture capital community and the big corporations really didn't know how to manage these passionate entrepreneur companies. Like Light Life sold the ConAgra for like in 1998 or something. And I don't think ConAgra really knew how to take advantage of it. And they ended up selling it several years later. But now I think that the space has become such a big category in refrigerated and frozen meat alternatives that venture capital understands the space better, and so do some of the big companies. So I think like taking venture capital is a definitely a good way to go. What I would say though is, the more you can prove the concept on your own, and the farther you can take bootstrapping from the beginning, whether it's friends and family money or a loan or whatever, the more negotiating power you're going to have when it comes time to bring on a bigger equity partner in a place. So I still think that there's a bona fide route for the bootstrapper and being scrappy and giving the proof of concept and sales and starting out small and growing when the time comes,
Right.
bringing on people. So I'm not opposed to venture capital now. And I mean, we'll see. I mean, this space right now is so hot and has changed so much. And we love it. We want to see Beyond and Impossible and all these good tasting brands succeed because it's a very big job veganizing the planet. And right now, even in this hot hockey stick growth category, plant-based meats are still 1% of animal-based meats. So there's a long way to go. And number two, so that's the altruistic reason is we want to see a vegan world. But number two is the business reason is that it's easier for us. We want to see a hot category because it's easier for us to place our products in a hot category. And right now, the conversation isn't so much, where are we going to sell this if we make this product? It's more like, how are we going to make enough of this product, that we're going to bring out to make it? So you've got to be prepared for growth.
Yeah. What do you think, Seth, happened? I mean, you write in the book that Tofurky was essentially unprofitable for, I think you said, for the first 18 years. And then things start to change. You start making some money. And then you come in more closer to the recent years where things just exploded. What do you attribute the explosion of plant-based meats into the mainstream to? Do you think it was that the products changed? There was different marketing, society was ready? Like, what do you think was the trigger that led to this explosion, for example, of plant-based meats in fast food restaurants and in the meat section of the supermarkets and so on?
It's a combination of things, but overall, I think, what we always say is taste is king, value is queen, everything else is marketing. And the products now have gotten so tasty.
And just to be clear, by value, you don't mean somebody's personal values. You mean how much the food costs.
Yeah, right.
Got it.
So cost is queen, I guess would be a better way to say it. But, the products right now are so damn good. And for so long, they were, not as evolved. And right now, when you bring out any product, it better be really tasty because that at the end of the day, people want to enjoy their food, and there's all these different reasons that you can look, to be that you and I know to become vegan, vegetarian. It's for the health of the body, for the health of the planet, the health of the animals. But if it doesn't taste great, it's just not going to succeed. So I think that's what's really driving this growth. And I think, Beyond and Impossible have done some really good taste and texture. I would have to say texture is a prince or something if taste is king. Texture is often harder than taste. There's been a lot of evolution in the meat alternative, like tasting flavor industry, so that, like, they can get any kind of flavor. And flavor is hard to get a great one, but texture is how it goes through your equipment and machinery, and you make like 5 pounds of this stuff in your R&D lab, and then you try to make 500 pounds, and you think, oh, I'll just multiply the recipe out and it'll be the same. But it's always surprising. The scale up process is always surprising. So, in getting that texture, which we had to do every step of the way, and Tofurky and the sausage and deli and everything, it was just, scaling up. So I think it's taste, though, to answer your question.
Okay, that's really interesting. So, one of the things that I took note of in the book was that Tofurky has this mission statement. And the mission statement is essentially the company exists to end the use of animals for food. And I was wondering if you now, looking back on the length of time that it took, if that's the mission, and if you had access back then to more financial resources, perhaps from venture capital or whatever, do you think that it would have helped the company achieve its mission faster if you had taken on outside investors? Or do you think that there wasn't a different way to do it?
So that's a great question. It's hard to say. We were growing after we hit a certain point, and we were profitable, and then we became very profitable. We didn't want anybody telling us, who we could support or what we could do. But like I said, back then, a lot of companies kind of got driven into the ground. I felt like, that it was more common when companies got bought for the brand to not go gonzo into, a bigger space. But, it would be like where brands go to die. But now I do see, this culture that knows. I think there's more of a concept that we know what to do with this brand and we can get it placed, because these guys are all trying to, the big guys, Tyson's and these meat companies, Maple Leaf, they're all trying to do their own knockoffs, Nestle, and these plant-based is hot. So I think that corporate America now has come on board. I don't think it necessarily. I'm sure there was partners that could have been good partners for us, but we were just wanting to be in business for the mission of creating plant-based foods for the world, but also giving back to the community, supporting nonprofits. We didn't want to answer to investors so much as we wanted to answer to the customer and the public.
Sure, understood. So, winding down, Seth, let me ask you. You've already talked about some books that were influential for you in this interview, but for somebody who wants to become, let's say, the next Tofurky, somebody who wants to start their own business, whether they're going to bootstrap or whether they're going to go the VC route, are there any resources or books that you would recommend or for them to check out, whether they be books or speeches or anything else that you would find influential?
Well, my favorite book on just food and eating, the reasoning, the discussion of like what to eat, and is Eating Animals by Jonathan Safran Foer. And I think that gives you a good basic philosophical basis for looking at some of the issues behind vegan and vegetarian foods. So I think that's a good one, because I think, at the end of the day, you need to have the mission at heart. The mission is very important to Tofurky, and I think it's the secret sauce of vegan entrepreneurs. I have yet to meet one vegan entrepreneur that didn't have more than a money mission, that had like this more altruistic mission. And that includes, Ethan Brown, Patrick Brown, all those guys. I believe they're mission oriented too. And the mission is important because it really keeps you going when the going gets tough and gets you to your Tofurky moment, so to speak. But so I think that's a great book. I think Philip Wallen's famous speech that he gave in Australia, he's a ex-Citibank executive, and you can Google that, I think is one of the epic speeches ever given about eating animals and why we shouldn't. So those would be two of my books that I think are good ones,
Sure.
And Search of the Wild Tofurky is not bad either, of course.
I bet it's destined to become the next diet for a small planet, no doubt. Um, so finally, Seth, you spent a career trying to sell first tempeh and now a whole variety of soy products, and from everything from roasts to slices to other to chunks and everything else. But surely, as an entrepreneur yourself, you have thought about other companies that you wish that somebody would start if it's not going to be you. So again, for that same person who's thinking, I'd like to become the next Seth Tibbott, is there a type of company that you wish somebody would start that nobody else is doing right now?
Well, I got two ideas. One is I think that tempeh still is poised to be a great product, and it needs some R&D. It needs to go beyond the tempeh cake that people like you and I can enjoy, and we know how to cook it or not cook it, and get it into some ready meals, some delicious formats, some sauces, flavor it, kind of make a jump, kind of like tofu did when tofu started going into ice cream and baked tofu and ready to eat products. We need more innovation in tempeh flavor because the product is just so damn good that it really needs like a flavor overhaul so that people don't have to be knowledgeable vegan chefs in order to enjoy tempeh. So doing more with tempeh is one, and I still believe in that. One of the great things about tempeh is it's a kind of high barrier to entry. You look at Beyond Burger; those are pretty simple burgers to make. It's a very simple process. We have one now that I think is great. It's a plant-based burger, but there's probably, I don't know, 12 or 14 different burgers because it's a low barrier of entry. Tempeh is hard to make, so you figure it out and you figure out how to flavor it. It's a higher bench. It's harder to somebody to knock you off.
Yeah.
So I'd like to see more with that.
Have you heard of the startup called Sunrise Foods? It's have you
No.
heard? It's Sunrise, but it's RHIZE, as in the microbe that helps you to make tempeh, the tempeh starter.
Oh, the Rise
And
Up. Yeah.
yeah, so Sunrise, RHIZE Foods, and they are trying. I don't remember I met them, but they're doing something with trying to basically create a new industrial tempeh production and new design for it. So,
Oh, yeah. I do think I've heard of them. Are they Canadians?
geez, I don't remember if they are or not. But
Yeah.
anyway, for whatever it's worth, there is at least one company in that space now. But what's your other idea, Seth? So, is somebody to try to popularize tempeh, perhaps in the way that Hodo soy has popularized tofu, right?
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
what's your second idea?
Oh, I want a steak. I think that there's plenty of ground products. There's sausages. There's deli slices. There's chicken. Even the chicken could benefit, from a little texture redo. I think all of them. We have a really good one, but I no one's really hit on a steak yet that I've tried, and I think that having that steak texture and flavor would be a knockout. So I'm really interested in that. It's amazing, actually, that you know beef knockoffs, like beef is one of the more intense uh, planetary bad guy products in terms of global warming. So we really need to break that pattern. So I would say that beef, and actually lamb too.
Oh Lord! Well, maybe there's somebody listening who's going to be very inspired by your story. They're going to go out. They're going to buy In Search of the Wild Tofurky, and they're going to start their own alternative steak or lamb company. So that would certainly be pleasing to me as well. So I very much hope it happens. So just to finish us off, Seth, tell me, when people say that Tofurky is a fake turkey, what would you say to them?
I'd say that turkey is a fake tofurky. I don't know why anybody wouldn't eat the real thing. Why are they knocking off tofurky? I don't get it. I will say that like every year, we've grown and we've made more and more tofurky roasts, and the press would always ask me, in these interviews every year, they'd go, I know you're making like whatever 500,000 of these roasts, but there's X number, 43 million something turkeys. Do you ever see the day when that paradigm would change? And I'd always go, yes, I do. I think that that day is coming where the paradigm will be tofurky, or a plant-based foods will become the new paradigm. And it was always said with a little bit of wishful thinking on my part, just to be, this cocky entrepreneur business guy. But now I'm telling you what, it's not wishful thinking anymore. And I see this happening, and, just getting onto this jet stream of plant-based foods right now, I think is the best advice that I can give to any budding entrepreneurs out there, because it is happening, and you get the dream that you prepare for. And if you position yourself now and get in on this still ground floor, I mean, we're 1% of animal-based meats, then you won't be sorry.
Indeed, I don't think that people will be sorry, and I'm sure that there were many people in the carriage horse industry who, after centuries and centuries of them dominating transportation, never would have thought that they would become the niche way to transport humans around. And of course, that's exactly what happened. And we certainly are in the ground floor on plant-based. My friend Christy Legawi, who runs Rebellious Foods, they make plant-based chicken. She did the math and showed it to me recently. And, if you're looking at it, not on a dollars basis, but rather on a pounds basis, her estimate is that plant-based meat is about 0.2% of what the animal-based meat industry in America is. So 99.8%, according to Christie's calculations, of meat that is sold is still coming from animals, whereas 0.2 is coming from plants. And just to grow to the plant-based milk space, which is now sitting at 13% of fluid milk in the United States is plant-based, to grow, it would be a major, massive advancement. But of course, there's still a lot more work to do. And hopefully the path that you have helped to blaze, Seth, will be an inspiration for others, not only to get involved, but it will also make it easier for them because of the work that you've done. So thank you very much. Thank you for writing this really fascinating history of both your life and the company Tofurky. I'm grateful to you, and I will hope that lots of people who are sheltering in place during this pandemic will order a copy of your book and take their time, instead of Netflixing and chilling all the time. Read this book too. It's a great way to spend part of this pandemic and to get inspired to go out and use business to do good in the world. So Seth Tibbott, really appreciate all of your lifetime of work.
Thank you, Paul. And I hope that we emerge from this pandemic, with new ideas and fresher ideas of moving forward to a more sustainable, compassionate world.
Thanks for listening. We hope you found use in this episode. If so, don't keep it to yourself. Please leave us a 5-star rating on iTunes or wherever you get your podcast. And as always, we hope you will be in the business of doing good.